Okay. Welcome, everyone. We're very sorry for the delay. There are some ongoing tech issues that we're hoping to resolve in the next couple of minutes, but for now we're going to start in. Has everybody joined in? Another couple of minutes to get everyone in. To be ready.
And Claire, I can just monitor the meeting room as well. And I do apologize, everybody, that we tried to mute the notification sound, but I don't think we can bypass that, unfortunately. So you'll have to bear with the ding sound. So sorry.
No problem. Shall we start with some introductions then? And welcome everyone to this webinar about interview skills for the DClinPsy interviews that are fast approaching. We'll just go around and do some introductions. So my name is Yvette Arthur. I'm a clinical psychologist. I work at South West London and St George's, and I'm also the lead for pre-qualified workforce development. And part of my role is to support people in accessing the DClinPsy profession. I'll hand over to Claire.
Yes, hello everybody. My name is Claire McGoldrick. I'm a clinical psychologist, and my role is very similar to Yvette's, except I'm based at South London and Maudsley Trust. So I am the workforce development lead with a focus on those in the early aspiring workforce, so those who want to enter any of the psychological professions. I also work 1 day a week on the IOPPN DClinPsy program as a clinical tutor. And so, yeah, really happy to have you all here, and hopefully it will be a helpful springboard into what is obviously a very stressful time for you all, but hopefully this will be something that you will find helpful for guiding you on to what the next steps might be for preparing for your interview.
Thank you. Ali, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah. So is it? Yeah, I'll go. I thought it said Ali. But I'm Alistair Bed. I'm a first year clinical psychology trainee at King's. I'm also part of the Improving Access Committee at King's, especially the Aspiring Psychologist stream. So basically trying to improve access to people from various minoritized and disadvantaged backgrounds.
Thank you. Jason?
Hi, everyone. I'm Jason. Really nice to see all of you joining us today. I am a second-year trainee at the IOP King's, and I'm also one of the co-leads of the Aspiring Psychologist stream within IAC. So thank you so much for joining us today.
And Emma?
So hi everyone, my name is Emma. I'm a third year trainee at the University of Surrey, and I also am part of the selection committee at Surrey as well. So help sort of organise what happens at interviews, kind of get feedback from applicants, and sort of shape those interviews. So yeah, really happy to be here today.
And Ema?
Hi, I'm Emer. I'm a first year trainee at Royal Holloway. I'm also part of the Widen and Access committee as well, WAC, which increases basically generates ideas and all that kind of for sorry, my thing is going basically I'm just part of the Widen Access scheme as well. And I have that kind of background as well as an aspiring assistant psychologist as well in the past.
Thank you. And I think I briefly saw Maya.
Hi, yes, can you hear me?
Yeah. Yes, we can hear you, but we
Hi.
can't see you.
Yeah, having a nightmare with the tech today. I don't know what's going on. It won't let my camera turn on, so I'm working on it. But yeah, my name's Maya Ford. I'm a first year trainee clinical psychologist at UCL, and I'm one of the widening access champions at UCL as well. Yeah, lovely to meet you all, and I'm hoping you can see my face very soon.
Fantastic, fantastic. And apologies again, everyone, for the technical issues. I think we've all become accustomed to them now. So hopefully everyone is patient with us and hopefully they'll be resolved soon and you can see all of us on the screen. But we're all really passionate and excited to be here in delivering this webinar for you all about interviewing for the DClinPsy. This webinar, I think, started in about 2022. And as of last year, we've joined it with SLaM and South West London St George's colleagues. And that's because there's lots of interest in interviews, as well as lots of anxiety about what the interview is going to be about, how do I prep, etc. What kind of questions will they ask? What do I wear? Yeah, hopefully we'll be answering most of those. But the important thing to hold in mind is that we're here to offer support. We're balancing, between telling you the direct answers that those of the trainees here delivered when they interviewed a couple of years ago, with just providing some support and some guidance that will help you prepare for the interview. So we're hoping that you'll get lots of enthusiasm and energy here today that can help you plan in preparing for the interviews versus getting all the answers and writing them all down. So use this as a guide. And what we want to center here today is about how you look after yourself, manage that anxiety, how you think about your support network. So if you do get onto the course, you'll need that support network to help you in managing the stress, etc. in the future. So there's some themes and questions that we'll be going through, and then we'll have time for Q&A. So hopefully those of you who have asked for specific questions to be answered, you've kind of put those through already, or maybe it'll be a separate time in which you can put through your questions. Either way, have questions prepared that you want the panel to answer, but we'll be going through specific themes to start with. I'm going to hand over to Alistair to take us through some housekeeping before we start the themes.
Perfect. Thanks, Yvette. So yeah, just some general kind of webinar housekeeping guidelines. You're probably very aware, but please keep your cameras and microphones off, especially just throughout the rest of the webinar, really. We have the Q&A section at the top. So if you have any questions, please save those, and we'll have a dedicated kind of half an hour at the end of the webinar. So if you want to save your questions from them and then post them into the Q&A, that would be fantastic. Yeah, that's it really. Everyone who registered for the event online, you'll be sent a recording of the webinar afterwards. So if you're concerned about having a recording or how to access that after the event, it should just be sent to you via that. I think that is everything from me.
Yeah. Thank you. And also, based on feedback from last time, we put together a brief presentation that is based on the responses that the panel will be given today. So I think that will be sent magically with the recording link at the end of the webinar. So you will get that at the same time. I'm going to hand over to Claire.
Okay, shall we get started? Yvette, have you got the slides? Did you receive the slides so that
Yep.
we're going to share them and go? Okay, so as Yvette said, we are not here to provide direct answers of this is exactly what you need to say in the interview for this specific question. There is a focus on themes and just general ideas, and it's very much just the trainees being very generous and giving up their time just to share some of their experiences. So it's not a one size fits all. It's just, again, like we said, a stepping stone for your prep for your interview. So I'm going to direct my first question, or for the first, I suppose, theme of the interview is around preparing for the interview. And Emer, it would be great for you if you could just share some of your experience about how you prepared for your DClinPsy interview.
Yeah, sure. So my screen keeps freezing, so I'm hoping that I'm not freezing. So just let me know if the sound goes or anything. I have my slides open anyway. So yeah, what I found really helpful for preparing for my interview, at the beginning, I got quite overwhelmed and I'm thinking, oh, what are my skills? What do I want to get across? Sort of overthinking a little bit. And what I found really helpful was to do a mind map of my journey so far, my things from even when I was, things I picked up, skills I picked up, qualities I picked up from even being very young, and from all my previous experiences. It can just be life experiences, things in your personal life, your work life. Think about, have you had a career change? All these things are relevant. You might not get them across in the interview. That might not be necessary, but it gives you a little bit of, I guess, I don't know, for me, it just put everything into a nice, neat line for me that and helped me pick out the things I actually really wanted to get across. What I think is important as well when you're doing this kind of organising and preparing yourself is reflect on the challenges that you had along the way in your life. Did you have challenges in childhood? Did you have challenges getting your first psychology related job, getting a degree? Think of how you coped with those challenges, reflect on that and try and get that across, try and get those coping skills and that resilience across when you're preparing for the interview. As they'll want to know what you do when things don't go right. When do you kind of ask for support with supervision? What triggers you? What do you do when you are challenged? It's really important to get across. And yeah, it's really important to just think about what you've learned. For me, thinking about what makes you unique. You can kind of get into a bit of a spiral and go down a rabbit hole. Well, I know I did, of, oh, what do they want from me? What do they want to see? You want to be very authentic, get you across, not what you think they want. Obviously, to some point, you do want to know what the university wants that you're applying to, but I wouldn't personally get too bogged down with that. You want to get like yourself across and your uniqueness as well. A good way to do this is think of like what compliments you've had from service users and what compliments you get from colleagues. You can actually just like outright ask them, ask your supervisor, ask your line manager, ask a lecturer even what do they like about you, and that can help you think of your strengths. And when you're preparing for the interview as well, so what I find, as I said, it's quite overwhelming to think, oh, what are all the things I need to know? What do I need to focus on? What do I need to do? I think it's important to focus on your strengths and what you do know. You have the knowledge you need to get the interview. You've got this far. So it's important to think of your strengths, think of the models and the population you know already that you know really well, and try and just know that even better maybe. You might want to focus, maybe you have a weakness somewhere such as research, and then maybe one other model or something, or kind of you can improve that a little bit as well. But I wouldn't get too bogged down with all the things you don't know, because it's not going to be helpful. And I can't stress enough, mock interviews as well for me was the best thing I ever did. I did as many as I could, tried to practice answering questions, unexpected questions on the spot within like 4 or 5 minutes. Is really helpful as well. You can just ask people to do this with you. It can be someone from another profession. It doesn't have to be psychology, a manager from another profession if you know people. It could just be a roommate. It's really good if you can get someone from a psychology background to help you with this, like a supervisor, but I don't think it's absolutely necessary. I think as well, you can also go back to your undergraduate or where you did your master's, ask for support. That's what I did. I did a mock interview with a career coach, and I found that really helpful. So there might be things out there that you don't know of. And I feel like I'm rushing now, but I would really recommend the CAR model, so context, action and result, but also adding an extra or on there for reflection when you're prepping for interviews, because it will kind of keep everything a little bit more contained. I would focus on reflection, focus on what you've learned and how you'll apply that to training, because that's really important. They want to know what you're going to do next, and what is the point of this, what have you learned, how did you learn it? But the most important thing is reflecting on how this makes you ready for training. I think that's really it from me for that question.
Thank you, Emer. So much information shared that really, I think is really helpful. I think it's really helpful, because I think what really stood out for me there is that it's really, I think you mentioned it yourself, is that, to get to the interview, you've done incredibly well. Mm-hmm. Everybody sees the number of applications that get submitted to all the university programs each year, and it's a testament to you and your journey so far that you've gotten an interview. And so really, I think what you're saying there is that the interview is an opportunity to showcase all that, that journey that you've been on, and to really play to the strengths that you obviously have. Otherwise, you wouldn't be in this position of having an interview in the first place. So I think that's really, really helpful, really idea around just really taking stock of your journey to date and reflecting on that so far. So thank you so much. I don't know whether anybody else wants to add in anything else there, or should we move on to the next question? Okay. Emer, on to you for the next question as well.
Yes.
The interview day.
Yeah,
Stressful for a lot, but tell us how did you cope with the nerves, I suppose, in preparation and then on the day? Did you cope?
Yeah, this takes me back. Oh God, yeah. So I kind of had a few points just for leading up to it. I think leading up to the interview is a very anxiety-provoking time. There's quite a lot of things on social media. If you're part of it, while social media and Facebook, all those groups can be really helpful for like preparing for the interview and knowing what's coming up, and you don't feel so alone. I think it's important to realize when you've had enough with that, because it gets a little bit insane. It's just, there's quite a lot, oh, I got an interview, I didn't get an interview, and then you haven't got an email yet. And that can be really, that's just not helpful. And I think sometimes the unknown, and what you don't know can't really hurt you. If you'll know when you get the email and get an invite to the interview. So knowing what everybody else is doing, I think, is a bit unhelpful. So I maybe minimize social media and WhatsApp groups around the time and leading up to it, and focus on yourself and your self-care at this time. Try and distract yourself with other things, keep yourself busy somehow. Easier said than done, I know. And coming up like the day and like that kind of a week or so before the interview, at the time I had some leave, so I was able to take that. I realized maybe not everybody is able to do that, or is able to actually take a break before that. But if there's any break you can take, even like half a day or something, just to get your thoughts in order, make time for some self-care, whatever that might look like for you. Even if it's just yoga like class the night before or something, or whatever you like doing. It could be gardening or trampolining, whatever you like to do. I think it's important to kind of just increase that dopamine a bit. It's important. And one thing I think really helped me personally on the interview day, I was watching a TED talk about interview nerves, and something called power posing came up, and I'd heard about this before. I think it's Amy Cuddy, who does a lot of research on this, and it's basically where you pose in a certain way for 2 minutes. I got a bit obsessed with this actually, but I think it worked, because I was trying to be calm. I was like trying to be controlled. I did a yoga class in the morning, and then after that, I completely started to freak out. I was shaking, my hands were shaking. I showed my husband, who was beside me, and it was ridiculous. And then I did a power pose, and I wouldn't say I was fine, but I definitely calmed me down. So it's actually quite amazing what that does to your body. And also what I did then is that I just kind of accepted that I was nervous, and I told them in the interview, and I turned it into excitement a bit. And I actually said, thank you for, asking me to be here. I'm very excited to be here, even though I just wanted to leave the meeting and just say a good luck. But that just really helped me. It kind of got me into a kind of into the zone, I suppose, of this is exciting. I'm happy to be here, and I think that's fine. I think they appreciate that you're being authentic and honest there. They can see that you're not afraid of some vulnerability, that you're human, and I think that comes across with your interpersonal skills as well. But also try and think of like your positive qualities as well, because we can all get into this mindset of, oh, what could go wrong? I'm not good enough. I haven't practiced enough. But actually just think of your positive qualities. Think about when you've been in this situation before, if you've had interviews before, and what you've done well. Any meetings you've been to and where you've come across well, and try and just remind yourself that you can do it, and that you deserve to be there. You've got the interview. I think that just will help calm you down as well.
Great. Thank you so much, Emer.
No
I've heard about that power posing. Is that like the Superman pose or something like that? Is that
you can it's a bit, yeah, you can do like more subtle ones, like you can do them where you're not. Yeah, I was doing that and my dogs just were looking at me like I was a lunatic. I don't know what.
No, but listen, I think that's the thing, isn't it? It's about finding out what works for you. And making sure you're intentional with doing it, because sometimes we can get so caught up in thinking, no, I just need to read one more article, or I just need to practice one more answer. But actually there's something about needing to be intentional around the things that you do to look after yourself. So it's not letting those other things slide, because actually it's important to know this stuff is actually helpful for me, like the yoga or going for a run or listening to music or whatever it is. It's about knowing what helps you and being intentional with enacting it in those the days, the weeks beforehand, and perhaps even on the day. So again, lots of really helpful advice there, Emer. Thank you so much. let's move on to our being a little bit more specific around our clinical questions. So again, and I think, I suppose something that just came to my mind there that we perhaps haven't mentioned yet is that we acknowledge that all different training programs have different styles of interviews, and they can vary greatly. And so what we've tried to do is here to give you, again, it's a general overview of some types of questions that might come up, but we acknowledge that not all training programs are going to have questions related to what we're covering today. And so so just wanted to acknowledge that as well. So we're on to your preparation for clinical questions. Emma, are you going first for this?
I think I am.
Oh, Jason,
actually.
sorry. Thank you. Okay,
No,
Jason, up to you first.
Thank you, Claire. I think it's really, really important to just acknowledge that these are my own reflections and my own experiences rather than absolutes, because I did an interview for many different universities, and we all have different ways to prepare. But I think for myself, it really helped when I just, I guess, accepted the fact that it wasn't possible for me to prepare for everything, and acknowledging that I will not have worked with all different clinical presentations. That's just not possible within the time frame to prepare for everything. So it's really important to just focus on your own approach, knowledge, and your own skills as a clinician, because two people might come up with very different ideas on formulation for a case. It's not only about the techniques or the perfect treatment plan, but it's also about bringing yourself in and your own angle into answering clinical questions. I remember in the interview, I felt so nervous, and I think it's okay to verbally acknowledge that to the panel, just saying, really sorry, I'm feeling really nervous, just to take some time. That can always help you as well. But with clinical questions and role plays, it really is an opportunity to show who you are as a clinician. So it's a helpful way to model your clinical style. For example, the key therapeutic skills that you would use every single day in your clinical work, such as demonstrating warmth and empathy. Make sure to also show this in role plays if your interview does require role play. More specifically, I reflected on a few cases that I worked with, not too many because I didn't want to be too overwhelmed. Not necessarily cases that just went well, but also cases that perhaps didn't go so well, because those were the cases that I found where I learned a lot from. And in my own experience, I found it really helpful to keep a log, but of course, minding confidentiality. So perhaps changing those details on your own personal log. But really, it's just being curious about my own experience. So I asked a lot myself a lot of different questions. So why did I do what I did? How did theory and research inform my clinical practice? Why did I use a particular model and not another model? But you could also focus on other elements. For example, you might want to formulate yourself in relation to the person that you're working with, and thinking about were there any relational processes that might have impacted the work that you did. So the questions that you can ask can be endless. And I think it's a really great way to further develop your formulation and clinical skills that will be so important in interviews that require spontaneity. Um, and the third point is practicing presenting cases and practice clinical vignettes. For me, I was really fortunate because I came from a background practicing as a PWP. So I had that opportunity every single week through clinical supervision. But depending on your role, it might be helpful to ask your supervisor for permission to practice presenting a clinical case in a concise manner and in an easily accessible language, and ask for feedback. You could also ask for opportunities to see if there's peer supervision, because that's an opportunity, again, for you to learn and develop your own clinical style of thinking. And it's really helpful when faced with vignettes. And finally, when thinking about service user related questions, it's helpful to familiarize yourself with literature on service user involvement. So I found it really helpful familiarizing myself with the ladder of co-production and understanding the different levels of service user involvement or participation. And I also found it helpful to reflect on other external examples that I've seen or experienced of service user involvement, and thought about what went well or what didn't go so well in those situations. For example, an IAP for me was how we approach asking for service user feedback. I was trying to think, were there different ways that I would have done it personally? So kind of thinking creatively as well. And then I tried to relate that to myself and my own experience. Were there examples where I did or didn't include service users in my practice, and would the outcomes be different? again, I think the key bit is to be curious and seeing things from the perspective of those we serve and support. And those are just some resources that I found helpful. So Formulation, Psychology and Psychotherapy is a very, very helpful book by Lucy Johnston. Pocket Guide for Therapy, again, lots of different models that you can see examples of formulation, and loads of free resources available on YouTube and by someone called the Trainee Psych Scribble. So all can be found on Google. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Jason. And I really like the idea of using that the ladder of co-production. I wonder if we could put a link to that into the chat. It might be helpful for those who mightn't have heard about it before. And I think I just want to echo what you said there around cases that perhaps didn't go as well as you'd hoped. It's rare that when we first meet a client that it's gonna the cases go exactly as we predict and as we plan, and that's not the reality of the fact that we're all individuals who can bring with unique and different experiences. So I think it's really important to acknowledge that and not to shy away from those times that you perhaps were working with someone and it went a little bit challenging or went a little bit a different way than you expected. And if you're able to demonstrate that actually you've learned from that and you understand it, then that's such valuable learning, because that's what we're trying to look for is the learning there, as opposed to thinking I did this perfect case and it went exactly as I planned in terms of my assessment, my formulation intervention. I think there's so much that that the interviewers can take from those cases where perhaps it didn't go as you thought it might go. So thank you so much, Jason, for sharing. Emma, would you like to come in now?
Yeah, so to be honest with you, I think a lot of what Jason and yourself has said has kind of echoed what I was thinking as well. I had quite a similar process in terms of planning for my interview. And I think for me, so, that reflects in very active experiences in clinical work. So I didn't necessarily think about, as we've mentioned quite a few times, what went really well or what was very neatly tied up with a bow at the end. I was thinking about those experiences clinically where I felt very stretched or very challenged, and I was taken to supervision quite a lot, or perhaps there were safeguarding issues or particular sort of work with other professionals where I really sort of broadened my understanding of an individual. And being able to sort of truly reflect on those. So as we've kind of mentioned, really think about, what I learned from that experience, how that experience made me feel, and what I think I'd done quite well or what I struggled with, and being quite human, actually, I think, in the interview process. Ultimately, the people who interview you want to get the best from you, and really what they're looking for is your capacity to learn and to be molded. They're not looking for you to be ready-made and already a psychologist, otherwise there would be no point to training. They want you there to have that capacity to learn and to demonstrate that actually you can see your limitations or where you went wrong and what you've done about those. So again, kind of using those concrete examples. So at the time of my interview, I had worked sort of predominantly in eating disorders. So I was really thinking about those cases that felt quite challenging and thinking specifically about what formulations I developed, possible treatment methods, even I know sometimes when I was an assistant psychologist, I would deliver some treatments, but sometimes actually more of your time might be spent doing assessments. So actually it might be just be honest about that and thinking around, well, if I did have the opportunity to treat this individual, what would I think could be helpful, And I think for me, it just felt really important that I demonstrated that this is an individual with a whole personality, that I'm not kind of just reeling off this case example in quite a mechanical way, that I'm actually quite emotionally connected to the case. Jason's already mentioned it beautifully, but kind of working collaboratively with service users. And I think sometimes maybe asking yourself, what are the pros and the cons of this? Because of course we know all the pros, but it can also just help you to consider what are some of the issues that you might come across and the barriers that you might come across when you try to work collaboratively with service users in a clinical sense or in a maybe in a service development type sense. So just to really kind of open your mind to think a bit more broadly about the NHS system. I've kind of mentioned it already, but kind of the importance of formulation and thinking about the social graces, thinking about how that individual fits within the world and the wider system. So not maybe getting too caught up in exactly what the clinical work was on a one-to-one basis, but actually what was happening in their wider lives outside of that. And I think one thing that could be really helpful as well is kind of reflecting on your experience of being able to build rapport with people. You know, when have you found it difficult to connect with someone or develop a relationship? You know, why might that be? Or are there people that you've sort of really empathized with? And do you know why that could be the case? And really trying to sort of bring yourself into the process. And as I said right at the beginning, ultimately it's okay not to answer perfectly. You are going to muck it up. You're really, really nervous. And as Jason said, I think it's okay to name that you're nervous, to say if you said something and you think, I didn't really mean that, you can kind of say, do you know what, actually, no, I've said something, I'm nervous, I think I've misspoke there. This is what I meant. Because as I say, they're looking really for your ability to learn and your capacity to learn, and actually having some self-insight and recognizing what your strengths are, what your limitations are, and not being afraid to own them is absolutely fine. You know, they don't expect you to be perfect. So yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Thank you so much, Emma. I think there's already this emerging theme throughout all the answers that are being given is just the importance of really owning your own experience and who you are, and acknowledging the fact that there is no perfect answer, there's no perfect trainee, and it's just your ability to really think about, reflect on your experiences to date and to think about, okay, well, what do I bring? You know, like we said, you've gotten the interview, which means that you've passed over so many that haven't gotten an interview so far, and it's about really owning on to those strengths that you bring and demonstrating those in the interview. Thank you so much to you both. Again, lots of rich feedback and thoughts there that hopefully our attendees can take forward. We're going to move on next to Maya. And this, I think this is often quite a big source of anxiety for those preparing for interviews. And it's around this idea about theory, practice links, formulation, and how to prepare for questions around that. So Maya, over to you. What are your thoughts on thinking about theory, practice links and formulation?
Thank you. Yeah, I found this can everyone see the slide? Yeah.
Yeah, we can.
Yeah, I found this incredibly daunting when I was prepping for my interviews. I only had one interview actually, which was UCL, and obviously I'm at UCL, so it was successful, but I think having that one interview made it quite the process maybe a bit more streamlined in terms of this, because I'd seen on UCL's website their kind of ethos, and it was maybe a little bit more pluralistic than other universities. So I kind of went in prepping for potential formulation, theory, practice link questions from that place of UCL has said that it's maybe more pluralistic. So what am I looking for in terms of what I want to kind of freshen up on? And actually at the time, so I went over my master's degree content, which was really useful because I hadn't done an undergraduate in psychology. So I was kind of refreshing, okay, so what's kind of like, I don't know, attachment theory, things that I was thinking might come up, kind of social learning theory, basic things like that. But also reflecting on my experience in my own job at the time. And I was working in an inpatient unit, which was kind of CBT heavy, but also had systemic practitioners and psychodynamic practitioners. So I was kind of, you know, drawing from multiple perspectives in my own work, but also looking back at things that I studied over my master's and trying to kind of pull it all together. I'm quite an abstract learner, so I was kind of, you know, creating scenarios in my head and jotting down ideas, doing kind of spider diagrams of things that I thought could come up. But I think a lot of my prep for this sort of question was just, you know, creating space in my mind. And that might sound really, really abstract and kind of like out there, but I really was just listening more in formulation spaces at work, and just hearing how other clinicians were talking about clients that we were all working with, thinking about the places that they were coming from, the experiences that they had had. Yeah, I found that a very, very rich experience. And I had been participating in those spaces before, but I think knowing I had an interview, I then was listening from a very, very, very different place. And that just worked for me. But I know it's different for everybody. And yeah, like my last point says, kind of using the team around me. I was really lucky to work in a place where they were drawing from lots and lots of different ideas, and I was able to sit in those spaces and ask lots of questions. So asking people with way more experience of formulation, you know, if you had a client like this or a question like this, how would you answer the question? And like we've said many times before already, this is just my personal experience, but something people said a lot was that there is no right answer. There is no right way to formulate. Even two people, you know, who are both working psychodynamically might formulate about the same client very, very differently. And that was something that was always sitting in the back of my mind, of kind of in the interview, if I get asked a question which is about this sort of presentation, there's no right way to answer it. I really wanted to be quite transparent in my thinking in terms of carrying that forward. Like, this is where I'm coming from, but it's not the only way. Something else that, you know, felt quite important to me at the time was also thinking about thinking about what I didn't know. So being presented with things and saying, from what we know, this is what I think is going on. But also something that was done quite a lot in my place of work at the time was, okay, so these are the gaps that we don't know. This is what we want to find out. These are the guesses that we might be making to fill those gaps. And I wanted to be quite transparent with that as well, with those potential questions coming up. Practical things that I did to practice were kind of just thinking about, I was working on a young person's unit at the time, just thinking about the clients that I was working with day to day, and using them as examples and kind of formulating what was going on for them from those multiple perspectives. And I found that really useful. But yeah, for this question, I don't kind of know what people are looking for, but I really think I prepared for it quite abstractly, because I really didn't want to get bogged down in kind of specifics and very kind of concrete, don't know what the right word is, yeah, in kind of boxes, because the place I was working at the time was very broad, but I found that quite useful.
Great. I think that's really wise, Maya, that approach you took, because like you said, sometimes you can get so bogged down in the detail you can't see the wood from the trees, and then it becomes very overwhelming and very difficult to then actually take a step back when you're being asked a question that perhaps, I think, Emer, you might have said it before, where sometimes, or maybe it was somebody else who said it, and it's hard to then refocus on the actual question that's being asked. And I think absolutely going back over the content, I think that was actually a really smart idea, because sometimes it's actually been a while since you've actually looked at specific theories, similarly for your undergraduate degree. And just something that I've noticed, I just wanted to add as well, is that often people get confused between theory and therapy. So just make sure you know the difference between, even though it might sound very obvious, but when you're being asked what a theory is, it is different to a therapy. So just a reminder, and apologies if that comes across as very obvious, but sometimes when we're so used to on our work doing certain different therapies or drawing in different modalities, we can forget that actually what is a theory and how does that influence perhaps the development of that therapy. So that's something I wanted to add. Anybody else wanted to add anything else on theory practice links at this stage? Okay, let's move on. So we're going to move away from perhaps more clinical work to now thinking about more around our research. And Alistair, you are going to give us a bit of an overview about how to prepare for more research aligned questions.
Yeah, 100%. I don't have a slide for this, just in case anyone's wondering, so if you want to take notes or anything. But yeah, I come from a slightly more research heavy background before starting the DClin. And I basically had a kind of research question document where I kind of went through, had all the kind of various types of information that I wanted to cover if for research related questions. So this initially was kind of the basics. maybe looking back to undergrad or master's courses, but things to do with kind of research study design, types of variables, types of error, kind of outcomes of studies, so effect sizes, what confidence intervals are, kind of, slight rudimentary stuff, but just to make sure that I kind of had the basics really clear kind of for me going into it. And then kind of building from that, I kind of chose some specific examples of how my clinical work and research work kind of interacted, and the kind of how they supplemented each other. So things from my kind of clinical background, examples of research that I'd done, and how these kind of supported my clinical work and developed me further. And I found that really useful, and just to have a few descriptions at hand, because it can be a lot of information to remember, especially if it's a few years ago. So I had those kind of vignettes of research I'd done, and what they kind of taught me, kind of ready at hand to go during the interview as well. I think a really important area is having an idea of what you would like to do for your doctoral research project. It's not always kind of highlighted, but there is quite a large research component across the DClin courses. Obviously, you have to do a thesis as well. So you're going to spend quite a lot of your time doing research. And it can also have an impact on what you want to do kind of once you qualify as well, and what your kind of areas are. So I would really have a think about what you're passionate about, what your research interests are. In case it gets brought up, what are your research interests? What are your passion? What would you do for your doctoral project? How would that influence the landscape of clinical psychology? And I think having kind of an answer to that formulated of, I would do this type of study design. I'm interested in this population. These are the key outcomes I would have. This is the kind of sampling of populations I would use. Really kind of critically think about how you would actually set up a project and have that to go, I think is useful as well. Again, why is it important to you? And how would this develop your research skills and make you that more complete kind of clinical psychologist, right? Those research competencies and how you're going to continue to implement research during your career after the training, I think is really important to think about. I would also critique a couple of research papers. You can kind of kill two birds with one stone if you kind of choose research papers that follow your passion or interest. So I picked a couple of different papers from different topics, and then one was around what my potential doctoral project would be, and really kind of critically evaluated the paper. So what was wrong with it, but also what were its strengths? What things would you like? What things would you take from those papers? And then its limitations and what things you would change. So if you had a question, okay, tell us about a recent piece of research you've read and how would you improve it? You've kind of got something to go. And then if it's related to your general topic of interest or passion, it can kind of cover a couple of questions. And yes, and the critical analysis of papers that would be really useful. I would think about the skills, kind of going in a little bit more abstract, but think about the skills that clinical psychologists bring to research. What are their strengths? Why is research so important to the NHS moving forward? But also, what are some of the hurdles, the meaningful hurdles that psychologists have performing research in the NHS? Things like funding, time, kind of systemic racial and gender discrimination, kind of what things would be valuable to show that you're a kind of competent researcher and have a kind of good idea of things you need to be aware of moving forward doing your own research, I think is really important. And yeah, coming from, I know there might be people coming from kind of a very research heavy background or kind of less clinical experience, and I really that was the case for me, and I really just tried to enforce that how my various research experiences over the years had developed my clinical skills, and could kind of use that as a kind of example of the kind of the interaction of those two domains. Yeah, I think that's it from me.
Great.
I don't know if anyone else has something.
Thanks, Alistair. Some really great ideas there. I really liked her in the prep around the research papers, but kind of aligning those with actually your areas of interest. But of course, even if you've no idea what research you'd like to do and you're very much just like, I want to see what the program has on offer, that's totally fine too. So there's no expectation that you're like, have a research project ready to go. I just need a program to pay me to do it. That's not an expectation at all. But I think it's really nice, Alistair, if absolutely, like you said, for you, if you do actually have an area of interest, that really is a good foundation for prepping around those questions. Anybody else would like to add anything else that they would think is helpful in terms of prep for research? Okay, Yvette, I'll pass over to you for the next few questions.
Thank you. Thank you. And I'm mindful of the time as well. We'd hope to be moving on to the Q&A section by now. But probably this is a reminder that we have a Q&A section. So if you look in the chat, the Slido link is there. And you can add questions. You can also like questions, which will bring them to the top of the list, because probably we'll be only able to get through a couple of questions from the top. But we're going to continue. So the next one is for Maya. How do you prepare for group tasks? And while you start, I'm going to share the slides.
Okay. Sorry, there's just a cat outside. It's really distracting. Group task. Yeah, this was also, I feel like everything was kind of hard to prepare for. But the group task, had absolutely no idea kind of what to expect. So I guess the way I went into preparing for this was thinking about how I was already interacting in groups, particularly groups in my workplace. I wasn't working with any kind of other APs or anyone that had kind of gone and applied for the doctorate. So I felt kind of on my own. But yeah, I was just doing what felt quite natural to me, which was just to be a lot more active in group discussions and be a lot more aware of kind of my role in those discussions. So in, you know, talking in group spaces, thinking, what point am I trying to make with what I'm saying? Noticing kind of team dynamics within the team I was working in, and noticing what were the things we were usually talking about, which tended to be issues of quality improvement, speaking about difficulties within our own team, thinking about kind of team dynamics where things could be improved, things that were really difficult and how we were going to kind of move past them. And I had absolutely no idea whether the group task was kind of going to be anything like this in the DClinPsy interview. But just thinking about it from that perspective just made me a lot more aware of how groups were kind of functioning. There was a part of me which felt as if the group task wasn't just going to be about what was being said, and also about how maybe time was being managed, or the kind of the sharing of responsibility and the sharing of kind of airtime was going to be kind of dealt out. So I was also just quite mindful of that and thinking about that. I also reflected quite a lot with the clinical psychologists at my job about personal and professional issues that they've come across, and that they've dealt with kind of within the team at our job, because I felt as if, you know, if I was interviewing someone, I might want to know about, you know, how would you deal with this issue if it came up? Because from research about clinical psychologists, I knew that, you know, our kind of role in leadership and problem solving is quite key, and that is something that probably comes up quite a lot in group scenarios, because we actually do have quite a senior, well, will have quite a senior role in the NHS, and our role in a group might be to take charge and think about leading problem solving issues. And so, yeah, in talking to clinical psychologists about those personal and professional kind of scenarios that could come up, I was also doing a lot of reading around conceptual issues in clinical psychology, wondering if it would kind of come up. A lot of this was actually, again, from my master's, and I found that really useful, going back through my old like kind of conceptual issues module and reading about issues in psychology, such as kind of, I don't know, it went from kind of p-hacking to well, like, what is the role of a clinical psychologist in the NHS? It was just really broad, but that was kind of all I could think about to do to prep for a group task, was just kind of be aware of times clinical psychologists might have to be incredibly active in groups, and And yeah, that's about it really. I don't know if that speaks to the question. I have no idea, but yeah, I found this one probably the hardest to prepare for because I felt quite on my own.
Yeah, thank you, Maya. And it sounds helpful to have spoken to clinical psychologists at work, or think about group-based tasks that you're already doing at work and reflect on those dynamics. So thank you. That was helpful. I'm going to move on to Alistair. So what to do when you don't know the answer to a question and you freeze and flight and want to run away? What do you do? I'm going to stop sharing as well.
Amazing, thanks for that. Yeah, I think this is probably one of the more anxiety kind of provoking thoughts and ideas around the interview, right? That kind of thought of, oh God, I don't know the answer to this. I failed, or whatever that is. I think the first thing, you're going to be highly stressed, at least I was. So you're obviously not going to be thinking, super clearly and have all your kind of cognitive resources ready when you're in this kind of anxiety state, right? So the first thing I would do is kind of, if there is a question, you go, I don't know how to answer that, and it's kind of happening. My go-to, because this actually happened to me during the interview as well, actually, my go-to was kind of, okay, start to kind of try and relax and breathe a little bit. I asked them to repeat the question. So I was like, I'm really sorry, could you just kind of repeat the question for me? And that kind of gave me a little bit of time to kind of try and kind of regulate a little bit more and think about the question. Kind of buy yourself that time. That was helpful for me anyway. The flip side of that is there's always going to be questions that might not be suited to you. You're not, like we kind of covered earlier, you're not expected to be, infallible and 100% no knowledge gaps and it's perfect on every area, right? So I think it's completely natural for there to be something that you might not know, and it's fine to name that and acknowledge that. Take that time. The purpose of training is to make you better, so you're not, that expectation isn't there. For me, when I kind of drew a blank on a certain question, I kind of just took it back to basics. I was like, just tried to be authentic. Okay, if I was in that situation and that actually happened to me, like, what would I do? At a fundamental level, and just kind of went with that, and it seemed to go okay. Yeah, I think that's kind of everything for me. I think it would just, something that would be important for me is afterwards, maybe not beating yourself up too much. That if you didn't know an answer, you're in a really highly stressful kind of intense situation that's been built up for weeks and months, right? So I think it's completely normal. It's kind of abnormal not to stutter or not to have something kind of, not come to your mind immediately. So I think if you do forget a question or you do say, I'm really sorry, I don't know the answer to that, can we move on? Try to be kind to yourself afterwards and not beat yourself too much. Yeah. I don't know if anyone else has anything that they would do, but.
Thank you. That's really helpful. And I think being really kind to yourself is important, as well as knowing that even if you've paused because you're anxious, the interviewers might not know that. They might think you're being quite thoughtful and reflective about your answer. So that kind of perspective taking and that helpful tactic of just asking for the question to be repeated. So thank you for sharing your thoughts on that. We're going to move on to the next question, which is about acknowledging our own experiences. So we might want to speak about diversity in all of its forms, our lived experience. How do we go about sharing that in an interview context so that it's meaningful? Because it's very brave to talk about our own lived experience, but how do we make it meaningful? I'm going to start with Maya, and again, I'm going to start sharing the slides again.
Yeah. I mean, again, this is just my this is my personal experience, and this is not kind of an answer, like a direct answer to the question. But the key thing that keeps coming into my head when I think about this question is relevance. There are lots of things that I, hold very, very close to my heart and feel like I could talk for years and years and years about, and I'm sure in the interview, or I can't really remember because I think I blocked a lot of it out, but in the interview probably felt very, very passionate about, I just really want them to know this, and it's important to me, so I want them to know that this is important to them. It should be important to them too. But if you really can't relate it to the question, then it maybe isn't relevant. And that was a really hard thing to reflect on in leading up to the interview, because I had a few points that I thought, if there's an opportunity, I want to speak about this and speak about my own experience with this. But then I was thinking, you know, if the question doesn't come up, will they just never know? And will that be an opportunity for me to really let myself down and not show myself in the best light? So managing that uncertainty and that anxiety was quite difficult at the time. But if something is relevant, so for example, I'm a Black woman, and in talking about a question about where I could maybe bring race into it and my own experience of discrimination, etc., I'm going to feel a lot more confident and powerful in what I'm saying if it's actually related to the question they're asking, rather than me really wanting to, you know, get an opinion across because I think it's an important opinion to have. So that was just something that was really, yeah, really, really profound that I was thinking about at the time. I did have a few things that I was really looking out for, because again, there are kind of issues that affect me, which I look at through an intersectional lens. So thinking about ways in which different aspects of my identity kind of combine and maybe interact. And I knew that in the interview, I was going to be kind of looking out for opportunities to name that and maybe talk about my own experience of intersectional issues, because I just feel like in my life in general, my eyes are kind of open to them anyway, just from being me. But again, that also comes down to relevance. I was only going to speak about intersectional things if the opportunity to speak about intersectional things kind of came up. And also, yeah, just keeping it quick, acknowledging difference. So, you know, if there was a scenario which you could look at through a kind of diversity, kind of equality lens, just because of the fact that I have some sort of lived experience, or I am kind of diverse in some way, doesn't mean that I didn't feel the need to prepare for to speak about things that I wasn't experiencing or that comfortable on, just for the sake of doing it. I think it's really important to be able to say, it might be important, I don't have experience of this, but it's important to hold this in mind because I can see this might be an issue, or something to think about. But also, you might have a similar experience. It's a difficult balance, because you might have a very similar experience to what's maybe being described or spoken about, but it doesn't match exactly. So just knowing when to say, I have an awareness of this as a thing, and actually this is something that I've been through, because the line can kind of become quite blurred. Yeah, that's it, I think, for me.
Thank you. So knowing when to bring it in felt quite important for you, and the relevance of it. Okay.
Definitely.
I want to hear from Emma and see what her thoughts are about that.
Yeah, it's interesting actually. I was thinking as you were answering Maya, about how mine was slightly different, in that I found it hard not to bring it in my interview because it felt so integral to my identity. And so, you know, I'm happy to share that I've had my own lived experiences of mental health difficulties. I've cared for people with mental health difficulties, and I come from quite a working class background. So, you know, and education wasn't something that was particularly sort of emphasised or seen as important in my upbringing. So I never thought I'd be doing a doctorate. And so going into that process, that felt, I kind of have that with me all the time. That is such a huge part of why I want to do this job. And I think one thing that I really wanted to convey in the interview was actually part of the reason why I was so passionate about becoming a clinical psychologist was because of those experiences, and that it's not just a job where I feel I can help people through therapy, but actually you can help people through developing research and advocacy, and really trying to challenge and kind of change the systems that are in place that mean that only a certain kind of type of person gets through the door. And I think, you know, for me personally, it led me to sort of really reflect on my values, you know, actually what's important to me, what got me to this point. So I hold quite strong values around equality and, you know, compassion and fairness. And, you know, and it felt to me that kind of naturally came into the conversation in interviews when you're thinking about service development, or you're thinking about, you know, what your research idea might be, or how you would approach something clinically. Naturally kind of bring this with you. And I, to be clear as well, I mean, I didn't feel that I needed to go into specific details about what my experiences were, you know, is about kind of sharing. I think what Maya said about relevance is so key. You know, it doesn't need to be really detailed, and you share what you feel safe and comfortable to share. But also it's about sharing in a reflexive way. So we're not kind of just talking about the things that maybe we've experienced, but actually, rather than detailing exactly what it was, what did I learn from those experiences that mean I think actually I would be quite a good candidate for training. And I think, as I've mentioned on my slide, you know, considering how these experiences might impact your relationship with the service users you're working with, you know, there might be some people that, you know, could actually really push your buttons and you could really struggle to work with. And having an awareness of that and what you would do with that if that came up can be quite helpful. So thinking about, you know, supervision, thinking about self-care, and knowing your limits, but equally also knowing how you would connect and empathize with people who may have actually experienced things fairly similar to you, or you might really be able to relate to. And also recognizing all different aspects of your identity. You know, I've named a few there, but there are also parts of my identity which are really privileged, and kind of having a real awareness of where you fit in terms of the system, and how you may come across to people when you're working with them sort of therapeutically and with your colleagues as well. So yeah, I think we've kind of covered everything. I'm aware of time, and as Maya said, it's something that I feel I could talk about a lot. But ultimately, I think it's just about acknowledging your identity and your experiences and how they're relevant to the role and to the job. You know, why you're here in the first place, and that being quite a genuine process for you. So yeah.
Yeah, no, that's really, really helpful. And it sounds like it's really important to take the time to reflect on why talking about your own lived experience will be helpful for the interview. But it's not a yes or no answer. It's not as clear cut as that, but really taking the time to think about it be helpful. Great. I'm going to move on. The next question, and we're nearly there with our questions, and then we can look at the questions from the Slido, is, well, a big one, coping with the weight and managing news, whether that be successful news that you've got a place, or rejection or reserve. How do you manage that waiting period? I'm going to give this to Jason.
Yes, so honest truth, put my hands up, I didn't cope particularly well. I really struggled with coping after interviews at the time because for me, I felt that the stakes were so high that it's the clinical psychology doctorate or nothing else, and that was all that mattered. But having had some time and distance from the interview, there were some things that I learned from the process of waiting and what I would have done differently if I were to go back in time. So I think the most important thing is it's such an anxiety-provoking period of time. There's really no one set way or tips that anyone could give you. It's just do what works best for you to manage and cope with that situation. So for me, it was I wrote down from memory the things that I said in the interview so that I could look back on it and reflect on it if I wasn't offered a place. But then after doing so, I immediately just try to suppress it as quickly as possible and forget about it. And I immediately left all of the Facebook group and actually deleted Twitter as well. So I can avoid all of the questions that I saw on my timeline. I did notice a really bad habit of checking my emails all the time, kind of like refreshing. Gosh, you know, I might get the results in an hour's time. Well, obviously that wasn't going to happen. But I guess the key thing is not necessarily all or nothing. So maybe negotiate with yourself. Can I reduce the number of times I check emails a day, like once a day, and then try to tolerate with the uncertainty, the things that we would tell the people that we work with in therapy. So just kind of applying that to ourselves, and also setting boundaries with family and friends. So I told them, you know, don't ask me about it until I tell you, because I don't want that to be a trigger point every single time on my day-to-day life. And self-compassion. I found this difficult at the time, but it became easier the more I practiced it. So it's compassionate reframing. So thinking about, well, what would you say to your friend if they came to you and they were so self-critical about themselves after doing this amazing job of an interview? So that was really, really helpful. Um, And I also recalled that it was such a big relief for me, and I rewarded myself for the hard work that I put in preparing for the interviews and reminding myself that I finally have some more time now to do what matters to me. And for myself, it was, seeing my friends, going to gym, etc., etc. So do whatever that matters to you after the interview. And I guess the last point is take all the time that you need. So for me, my first interview was straight up just not successful. So I just gave myself some time to feel that disappointment and feel frustrated at the whole process. And I think it's so important to tell yourself, it's okay to feel rubbish. It's okay to feel this way. Just take all the time that you need. And again, self-compassion can be really hard when managing unsuccessful news, I guess. But, I think I had tried my hardest to pull myself up and consider alternative perspectives. Like, there are many excellent candidates. Not now doesn't mean never. There are also many other factors that might have contributed to the result of the news, and try not to over magnify on my own performances on the day, and really try to lean in on reflecting on it as an opportunity to learn for future interviews if I did have one. And at the same time, I knew that I was quite fortunate to be enjoying my current job at the time. So there were also other opportunities that I could gain from the role if it was in my year for the doctorate. So I guess reflecting on that, it's like clinical psychology is part of my journey rather than just the end point, and just recognizing that there are also many different possibilities that I could take. So yeah, those were my tips and reflections from managing the news of self-care.
Thanks, Jason. Some really helpful nuggets there. I certainly emphasize with that one about managing social media, because I'm already noticing things which can feel very stressful, and keeping boundaries with your family, and also, yeah, taking all the time that you need. So thank you for sharing that. Thank you to all the panelists for sharing your honest thoughts about how you prepared for the interviews. There's one more question to myself and Claire before we move on to Slido. And Claire, I don't know if you want to answer first about our perspective.
Yes, so I suppose the final question is for myself and Yvette to really think about, or to help you think about what our perspective is. So having been on the interview panel, and what have we noticed, and what would we like to share? And I've made some notes as I've gone along, as people have kind of said. But I suppose the first thing I do want to say is that and you might have heard it already, but we're not there to catch you out. We really, really want you to give a really good interview, because there's, as somebody on the other side, if somebody, if somebody's really struggling, your heart breaks for them. You really just, the amount of time and effort and energy that has gone into people put into the interview. So we really want you to shine on the day. Yes, it might make our decision making a lot more difficult because we've so many great candidates, but I really just want to emphasize how much we want you to give the best of yourselves. Yes, so just want to say that. And said already today, we don't expect you to know everything. We're not expecting you to know everything. And if anything, if you try and come across as knowing everything, then that actually raises a bit of concern for us, because we're just wanting you to, I think, going back to what's been said throughout, is we want you to bring your journey, to bring, up until this point, what have you learned throughout your different experiences, both work and life experiences that have made you feel like you're in the position of getting onto a training program. So yeah, absolutely, we're not expecting you to have perfect answers, but we really just want you to be able to show and demonstrate the skills that you can bring, as well as the values that you bring, and who you are and your identity. It's come up in the questions in the slide, and it has a point that I was going to be making, so perhaps I'll be answering it here as well. Often they'll tell you how long you have for an interview. So you'll have, okay, you've got a 30-minute interview. We're going to have 6 questions, which means you have roughly just under 5 minutes per question. So perhaps you might want to think about that on the day. If you've already been given your interview slot, how long is your interview slot? And then you'd be thinking, okay, perhaps I'll be having around 5 or 6 questions, or, you know, so get practicing answering a question in 5 or 6 minutes. So that's something that you can keep a hold of on the day. It's okay to have, if you're online, it's okay to have paper and pen and ask, can I just take some notes? And I think that also can help. I think Alistair answered around not knowing an answer. I think there's something around being able to kind of grab your thoughts and take down a note. And similar to what Alistair said, I also just want to emphasize, if you're not sure about what the question's asking, you can say, can I just check? Are you asking me if this is what I'm at, if you're been asking? Because it's you know, you're putting it into your own words to double check. And again, when I've been in a position, I've always been like either yes, or I would say, okay, I just want you to listen to the question again if I think that you're not actually on the right track. I wanted to check just a couple more things, and I'll pass over to Yvette. We can usually tell if you're reading off a screen. And I know sometimes it's easy, you want to have the prompt, but there have been times where I've noticed the eyes have been slightly going to a screen, and I know it's sometimes a helpful thing for you, but it really kind of does put us off, or not put us off, but I suppose it just makes us a little bit, I just don't think it's helpful. I think it actually distracts you more than actually being present in the room online. So just wanted to share that with you. And then just my final piece of advice is, don't overcomplicate your answers. You being able to speak about a case that you worked with that that from start to end, being able to speak about that well, then talking about all the different things and over kind of complicating it can, you know, it's very difficult. It's an anxiety provoking situation. So it's own those experiences. Don't overcomplicate your answers, and just speak about either like 1 or 2 things really well. Can come across a lot better than trying to draw on millions of different things. I'm aware that all of this is easier said than done, but they're just hopefully a couple of bits and pieces from my point of view. Yvette.
That's really helpful. I agree with all of those points that you made. They're so rich. And just to add a couple of bits, because you've heard from trainees here from the various London-based courses mainly, and Surrey. So I would highly suggest that you take a look at the course website, because there'll be nuggets there as to their therapeutic orientation. Do they do CBT, or do they do, I trained at UEL, we do narrative, we learn about psychodynamics. So looking at the course profile on that individual website will be really helpful towards what the ethos of the course is, as well as the alternative handbook. So I've put a link there in the chat to the alternative handbook that's published by the BPS. And there you can find some insights as well from trainees on the program as to what the interview was like. You're not going to get the questions in there, but you'll get a sense of, you know, are service users involved? So then you need to consider how to include service users' perspectives in your answers, which we should all be doing anyway. So really hold that in mind, that each course has different interview values that they hold in mind, or ethoses, etc. Thing about managing anxiety, I think that's been emphasized already. Learn to practice that now. You know, when you're doing your role plays, take it as though it's the real thing. If you need some breathing, which sometimes you can do quite discreetly, or if you've got a stress ball, you've got an online interview, you could use your stress ball. Anything that can help you stay grounded will be really helpful, and to practice that in the here and now. Another thing is answering questions in full. So I'm sure the panelists here, like when you start talking, you feel like you've been talking for like 10 minutes and you think, oh, they're really bored. Let me just stop short. And I noticed that when I'm on a panelist, you see people getting to the answer and they suddenly become self-conscious that I've talked lots, let me stop. So it's really helpful to role play. Do lots of role plays. And if you can, if it's all right, record yourself doing a role play, eek. But it's really helpful so that you can see how you're answering the question, whether you see you've answered the question a bit and then you get a bit self-conscious and you stop answering the question. But role plays can be really helpful for knowing that you answer questions in full. And if the panel give you, say, a 3-part question, you can kind of answer each question bit by bit and ask, or say, the second question to be re-asked, or the third part of the question to be re-asked, so that you can answer questions in full. We talked about naming diversity. Another thing that I would add to that is the so what question. So when I was applying for the DClin, I kind of came in thinking, I'm Black, I'm from a working class background, I'm a person of faith, I am diversity, hire me. But I had to do a lot more thinking about why is that important, especially so that I don't feel like a tokenistic person on the course, I had to do lots of reflection about actually how has that informed my journey? Why is that important? How does that make me a good candidate? Do that reflection work beforehand, because then it will give you more insights into how you actually bring that in. And then the final one is reflection. So I know for a lot of people applying for the courses, sometimes you don't get to hear about what reflection is, or the Gibbs model, which is quite a common model of reflection. Try and do some research around that, because that can be really helpful for kind of bringing your answer to the fullness in thinking about how you reflect on a clinical case or a research case or anything of that sort. So hopefully that was very quick and hopefully helpful.
Great. Thanks, Yvette. We are mindful of time. A few of us can stay on a little bit after 2 o'clock, but I'm sure not everybody can. So we'll try and work our way through some of the Slido questions, but unfortunately mightn't be able to make our way through all. But thank you so much for your attention, and hopefully you're still with us. So I'm going to go to the questions. The question and what we can see is those are the thumbs up. So again, the Slido, put your questions in there, and then the ones at the top I'm going to suppose more focus on because they're more popular. The top question has already kind of been answered, but let's re-emphasize it. So in terms of theories, what would you recommend we know? Are common theories good enough for questions asked, e.g. attachment? So it's like, as Yvette has just mentioned, sometimes it's helpful to think about the courses that you're going to. So yeah, UEL has a narrative, more psychodynamic approach. Are you familiar with any of those theories? So sometimes it might be helpful for thinking about those, bringing those into your answers. The IOPPN, for example, is more CBT, which is not a theory, but it's CBT and systemic are the main modalities. So thinking about, are you familiar with cognitive theory, behavior theory, systems, any systems theories? And so, but again, don't overcomplicate it. You ask, are common theories good enough? For example, attachment, of course they are. Why would they not be important? We're not looking for any obscure, strange theories. We're looking at, okay, do you understand what you're doing, why you're doing it, and what has informed that work that you're doing? I don't know about anybody else if they wanted to add about theories and what theories they chose. I think it was Emma or Emer already shared the theories that they focused on. Anybody? No, actually it was Maya, it was you did. Anybody else want to share anything about theories?
I was just going to say that actually at Surrey we had to watch a video, and so I'd planned what theories to talk about, and then when we watched the video it kind of all changed, and I actually did end up talking about attachment theory, so, and that was fine. So yeah, I echo what you say.
Thank you, Emma. Okay, I'm going to throw this open to our trainees. How do we prepare for leadership questions? For example, I had a question last year, make a provision for refugees. How do we prepare for those types of questions? So questions around leadership, how did any of you prepare?
Sorry, that's a tricky question. Gosh, can I just acknowledge that? But
Yes.
yeah, not to interrupt the thing.
I think with the leadership style questions, in the back of your mind, you might be thinking, okay, so if I'm going to be a leader, I'm going to need to be coming up with all of the ideas myself, and it's going to have to be new and innovative, and I'm going to have to lead. But even just in thinking about, the example that was given about refugees, I'm just thinking around okay, so are interpreters needed? Things I think a lot of it is probably just really common sense, but in a situation where you're thinking, I'm going to have to be in the mind of a leader. If you have any doubts as to whether you can do that, you're going to be really overthinking it. So yeah, I think common sense, which is probably a really annoying answer to give. But Jason, I can see you nodding.
I really agree with you, Maya. I think it's impossible to suddenly think about, I'm going to set up a service in one question. I think it's kind of thinking about the approach, maybe. So kind of thinking about, from my clinical experience, I worked with refugees, so I'm aware that maybe I need to do X, Y, Z. Or, from my research, I could, have a service user participation group. Maybe I could ask them what would be most helpful when setting up a service. So I think you can try and link it back to your own clinical and research experience, but also acknowledging that, these are just my own approach. I don't have the answer, but I'll try my best to answer this question. It's okay to do that as well, I think.
Thank you both. I would nearly start off as well at being a bit more basic. What is leadership? What, reading up, what is leadership? How does it differ from management, which is often a mistake people make? And are there guidance, the BPS, I think, has some guidance around what leadership activities look like in terms of clinical psychology. I'm going to try and find the article and I'll put it in here. But there is some, sometimes we get confused thinking, oh my goodness, leadership as a clinical psychologist, it means setting up a brand new service and being really busy and important at a meeting. There's such a range of activities that fall under the type of what leadership is. So I would just be really clear around, okay, well, what is leadership? What does it mean to be a leader? And what does it mean to be a leader in the NHS? And then thinking about your current workplace, thinking about, okay, what does leadership look like in my current workplace? Am I doing leadership at the minute? How am I doing? What does it mean to be doing leadership at the minute as well? So really just, we're not looking for, that sounds like a very tricky question in terms of refugee provision. I obviously don't know the detail of the question, but I think it really is just showing that you understand. Thank you, Alistair. Thinking that you understand what it means to be a leader and to demonstrate leadership. Okay, thank you both, Jason and Maya, really helpful answers there. Okay, next question. I've had 2 interviews and both times I've ended up on the reserve list for a place. Feedback I've been given from courses was I needed to sell myself more. How? It's really a tricky question. I think we've kind of touched on it today, but when it says sell myself, which is so hard, isn't it? We don't want to be going in and saying, look, I'm brilliant. Look at all these amazing things that I do and I've done so far. But what do we mean when we say sell yourself more? Anybody, any thoughts?
I'm wondering if this comes back to that kind of the what. So is it the what, so what, and now what kind of part of those questions? Maybe focus more on the now what. What have you learned? What have you gained? What strengths have you got from that experience? Thinking of that reflection, kind of the method I spoke about, the CAR method, not focusing so much on the context and what you did, and those details aren't really important, but focusing on your results, what you actually did, why it happened, and don't be afraid to say, oh, actually, well, I think I did this and it worked well. They would definitely want to see you critiquing and not just being like, oh yeah, I'm brilliant, it's all down to me, and this person made changes. But yeah, I think it's just about selling yourself and kind of actually not being afraid to bring that, and just trying to be a bit more confident when you're answering those questions, and not to be shy, I think, which is really hard if you're not used to that. Yeah.
Thank you, Emer. I think that sometimes there is that matter of confidence that can really get in the way. And so perhaps sometimes that is as well as something that you could bring into your own supervision, is that actually, we keep saying it, to get the interview, you obviously have the experience and it's about how you show that off. So perhaps if there is something around confidence, it's about like, okay, well, both practicing, using your role plays, using your mock interviews, but also thinking about actually having some conversations. Okay, well, what's actually getting in the way of me selling myself right now, or talking about my strengths? And absolutely, I like that idea of if you're not familiar with it, we've talked about it a bit. It's like the what, so what, now what. So it's like a framework, or really a helpful prompt for reflection, of really just thinking about your experiences. So thank you, Emer, for sharing that.
And sorry, just to add on that, I wonder if, and I agree with all the points that have been raised so far, but I wonder if it's also thinking, why clinical psychology? I'm always mindful that when I meet with aspiring psychologists, their passions and what they do could be fulfilled in other careers that are perhaps a bit more easier to access, such as mental health nursing. So it's also thinking, okay, how does my skill set and why I'm passionate about becoming a clinical psychologist meet and match with the work that clinical psychologist does? And that might bring about a different flavor as you talk about yourself and your experiences in the interview. So just a thought on that.
Thank you, Yvette. Okay, next question. How detailed should our answers be? For instance, should be broad, concise 2, or in-depth 6 answers, 6 minutes. So I've kind of mentioned this already, this idea that you should be told the timing. And what I will warn as well, again, not all programs I've only interviewed with IOPPN, but often questions are can be equally weighted. So you might say, I've loads I want to talk about here, but bear in mind that actually that might come at the expense of a question later on. So, and so, it's about worth holding in mind, practicing your answers as well. Rarely, I can't imagine 2 minutes for an answer. Usually they want to hear you speak, so usually it is more than 2 minutes for an answer. And again, if you do start to worry, you can say, I've a couple of other things. I have a couple of other things I wanted to say about this, but I'm mindful of time. Can I mention them now, or should we move? Or should we move on, or something like that? So you can check in. Anybody else want to add anything around timing? Okay. Are you allowed to bring notes for the interview? Anybody want to take that?
I was going to wait to see if anybody jumped in, but I'm sorry for jumping in if someone else wants to add. For this, it kind of leads back to what you were saying earlier, Claire, like if you're looking at notes and it does look a bit, you don't want to get so bogged down by notes and becoming across unnatural. But I don't mind disclosing that I do have neurodiversity, and I did have all these notes and things up on, I'm laughing at myself now, up on my behind my computer, and actually didn't end up really finding it that helpful. Maybe one or two things that I glanced at, but I'm wondering if in my feedback it was like, oh, you're looking away from the screen a lot. So I'm just, I'm thinking, just kind of think about what is helpful when you want the note. Also, if you do need adjustment, there's nothing wrong with asking that. If you want extra time, sometimes they might give it to you. If you want to look at notes or write the question down and your answer down and formulate it, sometimes that's fine. You're in your right to ask for that, and that might calm the nerves a bit that you actually find you don't even need that. So yeah, sorry for jumping in again, because I know I only answered the last one, but I just kind of had to say it because I did have experience with that.
No, and really important point. I'm going to come to you now, Jason, in a second, but a really important point that you've mentioned, Emer, that we haven't talked about is that if you do need any reasonable adjustments, absolutely ask away. And we do know that people do not ask when they can ask, and I know there are barriers to asking and speaking up, but please, we are more than willing, in a workforce that we are trying to be as inclusive, we're trying to diversify, we really want to, we welcome those who have lots of different experiences and different needs, so please do not be afraid to ask that if you have for example, neurodiversity, and you have there are certain supports that can be helpful, that then courses should be accommodating to that. Jason, were you going to add something there as well?
Yeah, just very, very quickly. So actually, for my own interviews, for example, at UCL, sometimes give you a vignette and they actually ask you to make notes. So in that case, then it would be appropriate to refer back to the notes that you've written about the vignette. But also, I think it's okay to ask the panelist, is it okay if I just wrote some notes for my own thinking about the questions? Because sometimes questions can be so long that in itself can manage your own anxiety. But again, I would always ask for permission to show that, I'm willing to ask that question. So yeah, that's all I wanted to add.
Great. Thank you, Jason. Okay, we're coming up for the last few minutes. Let's go into, the next question. In terms of having some papers to know in the interview, is there any advice on how to choose and prepare for using these? I'm not sure I fully understand this. In terms of having some papers to know. So are these like if you're going to read certain papers ahead? I don't know, Alistair, if this comes back to you in terms of the research. Is there any advice on how to choose and prepare? Like what I suppose, what papers did you all read in advance? Was there any papers that that you found really helpful for preparing for your interview?
I'll jump in there then if anyone wants to, but I think it does mean kind of related to papers I read in advance. I didn't pick too many. I think I had 2 or 3. One was around kind of my own research interests, and just to kind of show that I was kind of up to date with kind of research advances in my kind of field of what I was interested in, and kind of did a critique of that. And then one was more about a kind of hot topic in clinical psychology, something that was kind of relevant to the field that is kind of something that kind of is quite prevalent in the field at the minute. And I think there's kind of various things that you could choose on, and I had a paper around that. But yeah, anyone else?
Any papers anybody found helpful? No? No, okay. Again, I think a lot of it really just comes back to just you knowing your own experiences to date. And so I think, like Alistair said, it was a paper that was relevant for him. So I think there's nothing like a catch-all, everybody read this paper. But I think we're just really thinking about your own experiences. Okay. Okay, really important question. I think we'll have a couple more questions, then we're going to finish up. But how did you organize your time with the prep? Feels quite overwhelming knowing how much there is to prep for. It can be hard to know where to start. So I imagine a lot of you would have had jobs as well. You were working at the time and then almost having to do prep as well. Emer, you mentioned as well about taking some time off if you can before your interview. Anybody else got any suggestions about like how do they organize their time in terms of prepping versus becoming completely overwhelmed with what I don't know, what you don't know or what you do know so far?
I was just going to say that one thing I did find quite helpful was looking at just the Band 6 clinical psychologist job description, and that being a bit of a way to organise my prep slightly, because I can really relate to that feeling of being really overwhelmed and wanting to make sure you kind of cover everything. So actually just going back to something quite basic to remind myself of actually, you know, if I were preparing for any other job interview, how would I go about that? I would probably go through the job description, take each point and see what I can do. And then obviously you can take that and expand on it for it being a clinical psychology sort of doctorate interview. So yeah, I don't know if that's helpful.
Definitely. Thank you, Emma. Really good way of structuring prep as well. Maya, were you going to come in there as well?
Yeah, I was going to speak just from an experience of doing shift work at the time, and obviously that involves like long day shifts. I was doing a lot of night shifts. I was actually on nights while I had my interview, which was awful, and waiting for the feedback as well. It was just a nightmare. But I think really recognizing that like taking days off is okay, especially if you're working long days or if you're doing nights, because actually you're probably not going to be in the right kind of like frame of mind to kind of do the best kind of prep that you can do. So if you set yourself aside kind of like 3 days a week where you might do some prep, rather than 7 days of the week where on some of those days you're going to be working a 12.5-hour shift and doing the prep at 11 o'clock at night, it might not be worth it. And I actually found that having the headspace from scheduling days where I knew I was going to have a day off meant that when I next came back to the prep, I was a lot more fresh in my thinking. So kind of, yeah, scheduling days where you're actually not doing any prep is incredibly useful.
And a really helpful skill for when you do get on training, because when you are on training, there are so many competing demands and it can often feel like, yes, it's okay, I'll just spend my weekend doing my bit of research or writing my clinical letters because then I won't have it during the week. And it's a marathon, not a sprint when you are on the training program, as I'm sure you can all attest to right now. So starting off even before you've gotten onto the training with those helpful boundaries, I think is just going to be really, really helpful. Okay, final question, and then we're going to have to finish up. Let me see. What have we answered? How do you reflect on a case that didn't go well, for example, where a client did not recover following treatment in a positive, productive way? Any thoughts on that?
I'm happy to have a go.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, it's quite interesting because I guess I wouldn't necessarily frame it as like it was still a really good thing that they didn't recover necessarily and kind of focus on that, but perhaps just specifically what I learned from that experience. So I've worked with lots of people where I've done work with them and they've not recovered, and actually going kind of recognizing what that made me feel. So, you know, it made me feel self-conscious, it made me feel imposter syndrome and concerned about my ability to practice on some level, but then kind of what did I do with that feeling? So I took it to supervision and I reflected on that a bit more, and I actually, is it me, or is it, you know, is there a wider situation going on rather than it just being the two of us? And so kind of that now, so so the what, so what, and now what kind of model through those processes. So rather than it you're not necessarily trying to say something's brilliant when it's not, but it's just about being honest in your reflections and what you've learned, I think, from all clinical experiences. Because again, it's showing that capacity to learn, that capacity to reflect on. And in training, you're going to come across so many challenging situations where you will question your abilities. So or that's been my experience anyway. So yeah, I think not trying to feel the pressure to kind of make everything positive, but actually just, what have you learned from it? You know, how is it going to aid you in the future moving forward in your career?
Absolutely, really, really important advice there from Emma. Thank you so much. There's definitely something about recovery. What is recovery? What does that mean? You know, you might have done really great work but it maybe not fall into the idea of recovery, of, you know, and how we might define it in other ways. And also there's something around, okay, well, how have you made sense of it? So if it didn't go well, how have you made sense of it? What have you learned from it? And, you know, what would you do differently if you were to work with that person again? Is there anything you do differently? Or perhaps no, what you did was what was needed, and actually there is something beyond your control that perhaps that was present that meant that it wasn't the right time, or whatever. Okay. There are so many other questions, but we have run out of time, and I'm so conscious that our trainees have been so generous with giving up their time from their busy training programs, and some coming from different lectures and study days, and I think you're in your final year as well, so it's just an incredibly hectic time. I want to thank so really want to thank you so much to our trainees for giving up their time to prepare and prepare their time, their energy to go back and remember what it was like in those experiences, and for your experiences. And I want to thank you, all of our attendees today. Apologies again for the glitch at the start. Hopefully we've made up for it going over at this time. And like we've already said, there will be recordings shared with you all in the chat, or not in the chat, and will be shared following the webinar. The slides will also be shared. But I really just want to really emphasize, this is not the catch-all. This is not, right, I've done my webinar, I've gone to the webinar, now I know it all. This is just some shared experiences and some guidance, but it is by no means perfect answers, perfect guidance. It's just what was helpful for our trainees. So yeah, hopefully a helpful stepping stone to the rest of your journey. Again, finally, I suppose I want to say that, like, of course, it's a very anxiety-provoking time, and it's stressful, and, you know, we've all been there, though perhaps a little bit longer for me and Yvette than from our current trainees, but we acknowledge how stressful it is, and it shouldn't be as stressful as it is at times. So please do look after yourself. Really check in with what's going to be helpful for you to looking after yourself over the next few months. And we wish you the best of luck, even if you do not get on this year. It's not the end. It's not the end of the world, although it might feel like that initially. But yeah, and very best of luck, Yvette. I don't know if there's anything else that you'd like to add at this stage.
No, I echo the same. Best of luck to everyone. And this is such an anxiety-provoking process, and you'll look back and hopefully feel differently about it in the years to come. I want to especially appreciate the panelists who've done a really excellent job in providing guidance and support, but not coaching, which is something that we're aware of, but hopefully it's enthused you for the journey of prepping and made it not feel so scary ahead. So thank you, everyone.
Okay. Any final words from our panelists? No. Okay, we'll let you all go. Thank you, everyone. Take care. And yes, best of luck.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone. Good luck.